What if the story we tell ourselves about becoming human is missing its most important chapter? Not a footnote, not a detail lost to time, but an entire epic, 30,000 years of breath and struggle, innovation and memory, erased so completely that we no longer even notice the silence where it should be. You've been told that Neanderthals faded into extinction around 40,000 years ago. You've been told that modern humans emerged from Africa, spread across continents, and somewhere in the cold expanse of Europe, the two species met. There was overlap, perhaps even intimacy. We carry their genes, after all. A few percentage points of our DNA whisper of those encounters in the dark. And then, the story goes, we continued. We painted caves. We carved bone. We built civilizations. A clean, linear progression from primitive to profound. But what if I told you there's a gap? A chasm in the fossil record so vast, so incomprehensible, that it suggests something fundamental is missing from our understanding of who we are and how we came to be. If you're drawn to the kind of history that sleeps between the cracks of accepted narratives, the kind that asks uncomfortable questions about what we've forgotten or never knew at all, then perhaps you'll stay with me. Subscribe if this journey calls to you. And tell me, wherever you are in the world right now, listening in the darkness or the light, tell me where you're listening from. Because this story belongs to all of us. The gap begins around 40,000 years ago, when the last confirmed Neanderthal populations vanished from their final refuges in Iberia and the Balkans. The gap ends around 10,000 years ago, when the unmistakable signatures of modern human culture explode across the archaeological record. Cave paintings at Lascaux, Venus figurines scattered across Europe, complex burial sites that speak of ritual, belief, perhaps even religion. 30,000 years between these 2 points. 30 millennia that should be rich with evidence of our journey, our transformation, our becoming. And yet, when you look closely at what we've found, at what the Earth has yielded from those long centuries, there are holes. Not small gaps, not minor absences, but profound silences. There are sites where we find remains that don't quite fit the narrative. Bones that are neither fully Neanderthal nor fully anatomically modern. Skulls with brow ridges too pronounced for us, brains too large for them. Tools that appear in layers they shouldn't, crafted with techniques that suggest knowledge neither species was supposed to possess at that time. And then there are the markings. Strange symbols carved into stone, scratched into cave walls in remote corners of Europe and Asia. Geometric patterns that repeat across thousands of miles and thousands of years, as if someone was trying to communicate something we no longer understand. The orthodox explanation is straightforward. These are anomalies, outliers, examples of natural variation within populations we already know existed. The strange bones are simply Neanderthals with unusual features, or early modern humans adapting to harsh climates. The tools are evidence of cultural exchange, of ideas spreading slowly across the landscape. The symbols are random, meaningless, or at best, early attempts at decoration. But what if the anomalies aren't errors in the record? What if they're the record trying to tell us something we're not ready to hear? Consider this. In 2015, researchers examining a skull fragment from Manat Cave in Israel announced something extraordinary. The bone was 40,000 years old, placing it right at the boundary where Neanderthals and modern humans would have overlapped. The skull showed features of both species, but it also displayed characteristics that didn't belong to either. The proportions were wrong. The cranial capacity was larger than it should have been. The researchers concluded it was an early modern human, but their published papers contain careful language, hedged statements, phrases like unexpected morphology, and requires further investigation. What were they seeing that troubled them? In Siberia, in a cave called Denisova, scientists found a finger bone, just a fragment barely enough to hold, let alone analyze. But the DNA they extracted from it told a story that shattered our simple narrative. The bone belonged to neither Neanderthal nor modern human. It was something else. A third population, now called Denisovans, that lived alongside both of us and interbred with both of us. We carry their genes too, particularly those of us whose ancestors lived in Asia and Oceania. But here's the unsettling part. We have almost no physical evidence of them. A finger bone, a few teeth, fragments of skull that might or might not belong to the same population. For a species that apparently lived across a vast range and survived for tens of thousands of years, they left almost nothing behind. Or rather, they left nothing we recognize. What if there were others? Not just Denisovans, but populations we haven't named yet, groups that filled the spaces between the species we know, that carried forward knowledge and culture in ways we can't yet trace? The more you examine the evidence from this hidden epoch, the more patterns begin to emerge. Patterns that suggest the story of human evolution during those 30,000 years was far more complex, far stranger, than we've allowed ourselves to imagine. Let's talk about the tools. In 2018, archaeologists working in the Rhône Valley of France uncovered a layer of sediment dated to 35,000 years ago. Within that layer, they found stone blades of extraordinary sophistication. The knapping technique required to create them involved a process called pressure flaking, where thin, precise flakes are removed from a stone core using controlled pressure rather than percussion. This technique produces razor-sharp edges and allows for incredibly detailed work. The problem is this: pressure flaking isn't supposed to appear in Europe until much later, perhaps 25,000 years ago, and it's associated exclusively with anatomically modern humans. Neanderthals, according to the standard model, never developed this technology. They were capable toolmakers, yes, but their techniques were different, more direct, less refined. So who made these blades? The researchers attributed them to early modern humans, suggesting that our ancestors arrived in the region earlier than previously thought and brought advanced techniques with them. But there were no human remains in the layer. No clear habitation sites, just the tools themselves, perfect and inexplicable, waiting in the dark earth. And they weren't alone. Similar anomalous tool assemblages have been found across Europe and into Central Asia. Blades that are too advanced for their context. Bone tools carved with a precision that suggests metal implements, even though metal wouldn't be worked by humans for another 20,000 years. Needles so fine, with eyes so carefully bored, that they could have been used for the most delicate embroidery. Who taught whom? Who learned from whom? And why, if modern humans possessed these skills, do we see such uneven distribution across the landscape? Why do some regions show evidence of incredible sophistication while others, occupied by the same species at the same time, show nothing but the most basic technology? Unless it wasn't the same species, unless there were multiple populations, each with their own knowledge, their own traditions, moving through the landscape like shadows, leaving only the faintest traces. In the caves of Spain, in the limestone hollows of Gibraltar, researchers have found something even stranger. Red ochre pigment, carefully prepared and stored. But not just stored, applied. Smeared onto walls, onto bones, onto the very rock itself. The conventional interpretation is that Neanderthals, in their final years, learned the practice of symbolic decoration from modern humans. Cultural exchange, borrowing, imitation. But the dates don't always support this. Some of the ochre use in Neanderthal sites predates any confirmed modern human presence in the region. The Neanderthals, it seems, were already painting, already marking, already engaging in some form of symbolic behavior before we arrived. Or perhaps they learned it from someone else. Someone who came before us. Someone who left no name, no clear remains, only these whispers of knowledge scattered across the archaeological record. There's a site in Germany, in the Swabian Jura, where archaeologists found a flute carved from a vulture's wing bone. It's 40,000 years old, placing it right in the heart of our hidden epoch. The flute has 5 finger holes, carefully measured and drilled, and when researchers created a replica and played it, the notes it produced were clear and true, part of a recognizable musical scale. Music. Not just sound, but organized, intentional music. The kind that requires understanding of pitch, rhythm, harmony. The kind that suggests not just culture, but sophisticated culture. Aesthetic sensibility. Perhaps even ceremony. We attribute the flute to early modern humans because the alternative is too troubling. But what if the alternative is the truth? What if someone else, some population we haven't identified, was making music in those caves, was filling the cold European night with melody, tens of thousands of years before we thought such things were possible? The bones tell their own story, and it's a story full of contradiction. In 2010, the complete Neanderthal genome was sequenced, and the results confirmed what many had suspected: modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. Most non-African humans today carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. We are, in a very real sense, their descendants as much as we are descendants of the anatomically modern humans who left Africa. But the genetic evidence revealed something else, something far more unsettling. The interbreeding wasn't a single event. It happened multiple times in multiple locations over thousands of years. And the patterns of gene flow suggest that the populations involved weren't always clearly Neanderthal or clearly modern. There were intermediates, hybrids, groups that carried genetic material from both lineages and perhaps from others we haven't yet identified. In other words, the boundary between Neanderthal and modern human wasn't a sharp line. It was a gradient, a spectrum, a zone of interaction and mixture that lasted for millennia. And within that zone, populations emerged that were neither one thing nor the other. Populations that might have had their own cultures, their own innovations, their own ways of understanding the world. What happened to them? Where did they go? And more importantly, what did they leave behind? You see, the story we tell ourselves about human evolution is a story of replacement. Modern humans emerged, spread, and replaced all other hominin species. Clean, simple, triumphant. But the evidence from this hidden epoch suggests something far messier, far more complex. Not replacement, but absorption. Not conquest, but synthesis. We didn't simply replace the Neanderthals. We became them. Or rather, we became something new, something that carried forward pieces of everyone who came before. And if that's true, then the innovations we see in the archaeological record, the sudden explosion of culture and technology around 30,000 years ago, might not be innovations at all. They might be memories, things learned, things preserved, things passed down through generations of hybrid populations until they finally crystallized into the forms we recognize as distinctly human. There's a place in Siberia where the earth is always frozen. Permafrost, they call it. A layer of ice and soil that has remained solid for tens of thousands of years, preserving everything trapped within it like insects in amber. In this frozen ground, researchers have found bodies. Not skeletons. Bodies. Preserved so perfectly. By the cold that skin remains, hair remains, even organs remain, intact and analyzable after 30,000 years or more. Cave lions, woolly mammoths, and sometimes rarely humans. In 2019, a team excavating near the Yana River uncovered the partial remains of a child. The bone collagen yielded radiocarbon dates of 31,000 years before present. The DNA analysis revealed something extraordinary. The child carried genetic markers from 3 distinct populations: Neanderthal, Denisovan, and anatomically modern human, a triple hybrid, not just the distant echo of ancient interbreeding, but the direct offspring of parents who themselves carried mixed ancestry. The child lived during our hidden epoch in the heart of the gap, and its very existence challenges everything we think we know about how species interact, how populations merge, how humanity became what it is. The researchers published their findings in a prestigious journal, but if you read the paper carefully, you'll notice something. They don't speculate about what this child's life might have been like. They don't discuss what culture the child belonged to, what language it might have spoken, what beliefs its people held. They present the genetic data and then fall silent, as if acknowledging that they've stumbled onto something too large, too strange, to fit within the existing frameworks of paleoanthropology. Who were this child's people? What did they call themselves? What stories did they tell? We'll never know. The child died 31,000 years ago, and whatever culture it belonged to left no trace beyond the fragile threads of DNA woven through its ancient bones. But there are hints. Scattered across the landscape of Eurasia, in caves and rock shelters from Portugal to China, there are symbols, not pictures, not representations of animals or humans or the hunt, just symbols, geometric patterns carved or painted onto stone, circles, spirals, grids, lines that intersect and diverge, creating shapes that feel almost mathematical in their precision. For decades, archaeologists dismissed these markings as decoration, random scratchings, doodles. But in recent years, researchers have begun to notice something. The symbols repeat, not just within a single site, but across vast distances. A spiral carved into a cave wall in France appears again in a rock shelter in Turkey. A grid pattern in Spain mirrors one in Siberia. The same shapes, rendered in the same way, separated by thousands of miles and, sometimes, thousands of years. This isn't random. This is communication. But communication of what? And between whom? One hypothesis is that these symbols represent a proto-writing system, a visual language that predates the earliest known scripts by 20,000 years. Another is that they're calendrical, marking the passage of seasons or the movements of celestial bodies. A third, more radical possibility is that they're mnemonic devices, tools for preserving and transmitting complex information across generations without the need for written language. But all of these hypotheses assume that the symbols were created by anatomically modern humans. What if they weren't? What if these markings are the legacy of the populations that filled our hidden epoch, the hybrid groups that carried knowledge from multiple lineages and synthesized it into something entirely new? Think about what that would mean. It would mean that the foundations of human symbolic thought, the very capacity that allows us to represent abstract concepts and communicate them across time and space, didn't originate with us. It was inherited, passed down from populations that existed before the cultural explosion we associate with the Upper Paleolithic. We didn't invent symbolic thinking. We remembered it. There's a word in anthropology, cryptic. It refers to populations that exist but leave no clear trace, groups that move through the landscape like ghosts, influencing the genetics and cultures of others, but never quite cohering into a distinct, identifiable entity in the archaeological record. What if our hidden epoch was filled with cryptic populations? Not one, but many. Groups that emerged from the complex interactions between Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. Groups that lived for a few thousand years, passing on their knowledge and their genes, before being absorbed back into the larger populations around them. These cryptic populations would explain the anomalies, the tools that appear too early, the symbols that spread too far, the bones that don't quite fit. They would explain why the genetic evidence is so tangled, why every new DNA analysis seems to reveal another layer of complexity, another ghost population that contributed to our ancestry. They would explain why, when modern humans finally did explode across the cultural landscape 30,000 years ago, they seemed to already know so much. How to work stone with incredible precision. How to create music. How to paint. How to bury their dead with ceremony and care. Because they weren't learning these things for the first time. They were remembering them, recovering knowledge that had been circulating among hybrid populations for millennia, waiting for the right moment, the right conditions to fully crystallize. But this raises another question, doesn't it? If these cryptic populations existed, if they carried forward such sophisticated knowledge, why did they leave so little behind? Why are they so hard to find? The answer might be environmental. The period from 40 to 30,000 years ago was one of incredible climatic instability. Temperatures swung wildly. Ice sheets advanced and retreated. Sea levels rose and fell. Entire landscapes were swallowed by glaciers or drowned by rising oceans. The coastal plains where many populations likely lived are now hundreds of feet underwater, their archaeological records lost forever beneath the waves. What we've found is only what happened to be preserved in the handful of caves and rock shelters that remained habitable and accessible. The vast majority of human experience during this epoch is simply gone, erased by the relentless forces of ice and water and time. We're trying to reconstruct 30,000 years of human history from fragments. A few bones, a handful of tools, some ochre on a cave wall. It's like trying to understand a novel by reading 3 random pages. Let's go deeper into the genetic evidence, because it's there, in the nucleotides and base pairs that make up our DNA, that the story of our hidden epoch is most clearly written. When scientists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome in 2010, they expected to find a clear separation between Neanderthal and modern human lineages. 2 species that diverged hundreds of thousands of years ago, evolved in isolation, and then briefly came into contact before the Neanderthals went extinct. Simple, clean. But that's not what the data showed. Instead, They found evidence of multiple waves of interbreeding, occurring at different times and in different places. The first wave happened perhaps 60,000 years ago, when modern humans first left Africa and encountered Neanderthal populations in the Middle East. But there were later waves too. In Europe, around 40,000 years ago, right at the beginning of our hidden epoch. And possibly even later, in isolated pockets where Neanderthal populations hung on longer than we thought possible. Each wave of interbreeding left a signature in our genomes, a pattern of shared DNA that can be traced and dated. And what those signatures reveal is this: the interactions between modern humans and Neanderthals weren't brief encounters. They were prolonged, ongoing relationships that lasted thousands of years. But the genetic story gets stranger. In 2018, researchers announced that they had found evidence of a ghost population in African genomes. This population didn't correspond to any known hominin species. It wasn't Neanderthal because Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, not Africa. It wasn't Denisovan for the same reason. It was something else. Something that lived in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago and contributed DNA to the ancestors of modern humans before they left the continent. We have no fossils of this ghost population. No tools. No caves. Just the genetic echoes in our DNA, whispering that our lineage is far more tangled than we ever imagined. And then there's the DNA from the Denisovans themselves. The few fragments we have reveal that they too interbred with multiple populations. With Neanderthals, with modern humans, and with at least one other, even more mysterious hominin group that diverged from our common ancestor over 1 million years ago. This unknown group, sometimes called superarchaic, left genetic traces in the Denisovan genome that suggest something almost unimaginable. There were populations of hominins living in Asia during the Pleistocene that were as different from us as we are from Homo erectus. And yet, somehow, there was contact, gene flow, interbreeding. How? Under what circumstances? What did those encounters look like? The more we learn, the more it becomes clear that the human family tree isn't a tree at all. It's a braided stream, a tangled web of lineages that split and merged and split again over hundreds of thousands of years. And the densest part of that tangle, the place where the most branches converge, is our hidden epoch. Between 40 and 30,000 years ago, something happened. Multiple hominin populations, each with their own evolutionary history, came into sustained contact. They interbred. They exchanged not just genes but ideas, technologies, perhaps even languages. And from that crucible of interaction emerged the cultural explosion we associate with the Upper Paleolithic. But here's the question that haunts me, that keeps me awake in the darkness. If these populations were so important, if they played such a crucial role in shaping who we are, why do we know so little about them? Why are they so cryptic? One possibility is that they were small. Population genetics suggests that effective breeding populations during this period might have numbered in the hundreds, not thousands. Small groups moving through vast landscapes, meeting rarely, interacting briefly, but nevertheless passing on crucial knowledge and genetic material. Another possibility is that they were specialized. Perhaps these cryptic populations occupied ecological niches that left little archaeological trace. Coastal dwellers whose sites are now underwater. Nomadic groups who left no permanent settlements. Highlanders who lived in regions too remote or too harsh for later archaeologists to explore. Or perhaps, and this is the most unsettling possibility, they were deliberately erased. Not physically destroyed, but absorbed so completely into the populations around them that their distinct identity vanished. Their genes survive in us. Their knowledge survives in the sudden appearance of sophisticated technologies. But they themselves, as a distinct people with their own culture and story, are gone. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called a hybrid zone. It's a geographic region where two species or populations meet and interbreed, producing offspring that carry genetic material from both parents. In most cases, hybrid zones are narrow and unstable. Hybrids are often less fit than either parent population, and natural selection tends to reinforce the separation between the two groups. But sometimes, in rare cases, hybrid zones can be creative. The mixing of genetic material from different populations can produce combinations that are actually more adaptive, better suited to their environment than either parent population. When this happens, the hybrid zone can expand, and a new population can emerge, one that's distinct from both parents. I think our hidden epoch was a hybrid zone. Not a narrow strip of territory, but an entire continent. Not unstable, but explosively creative. And the population that emerged from it was us. Modern humans as we know them today. But we didn't emerge alone. We carried with us the genetic legacy of everyone who contributed to that hybrid zone. Neanderthals, Denisovans, the ghost populations of Africa and Asia, the superarchaic hominins whose names we don't even know. We are, all of us, walking mosaics of ancient lineages, living testaments to 30,000 years of interaction and synthesis. And if that's true, then the question isn't why do we know so little about the populations that filled our hidden epoch. The question is, how much of them is still inside us, shaping the way we think, the way we feel, the way we understand the world. When you look in a mirror, whose eyes are looking back? Now let's talk about language, because it's in language that the mystery of our hidden epoch becomes almost unbearably profound. Human language is unique, not just complex, but categorically different from any communication system used by other animals. We don't just signal, we create. We generate infinite meanings from finite elements, combining sounds and symbols in ways that can express abstract concepts, hypothetical scenarios, things that exist only in imagination. But when did this capacity emerge? And more importantly, how? The orthodox view is that fully modern language appeared relatively recently, perhaps 50 to 70,000 years ago, coinciding with the emergence of anatomically modern humans and their migration out of Africa. The evidence cited includes the sudden appearance of complex tools, art, and symbolic behavior in the archaeological record. But there are problems with this view. First, Neanderthals had the anatomical capacity for speech. Their hyoid bones, the small horseshoe-shaped bones in the throat that anchor the muscles used in speech, are virtually identical to ours. They had the FOXP2 gene, the so-called language gene, that's crucial for the fine motor control required for articulate speech. Everything about their physical structure suggests they could talk. And yet, we've resisted the idea that they had language like ours. Why? Because if they did, if Neanderthals possessed fully modern linguistic capabilities, then language itself becomes much older, and its origins become much more mysterious. But perhaps the more interesting question isn't whether Neanderthals had language. It's who taught it to them. There's linguistic evidence that suggests something strange happened during our hidden epoch. Computational linguists studying the deep structure of human languages have found patterns that seem to predate the divergence of modern language families. Core grammatical structures, basic vocabulary related to kinship and numbers and natural phenomena, elements that appear in languages across the world, even though those languages have been separated for tens of thousands of years. The conventional explanation is that these commonalities reflect the structure of the human brain, universal cognitive features that shape how all humans process and produce language. But there's another possibility. They're vestiges of an earlier, more widespread linguistic system that existed during our hidden epoch. A proto-language, perhaps, or even multiple proto-languages that contributed different elements to the linguistic diversity we see today. Think about what this means. If language, or something very much like language, was already circulating among the hybrid populations of our hidden epoch, then the explosion of symbolic culture 30,000 years ago wasn't the invention of a new capability. It was the refinement, the perfection, of a capability that had been developing for much longer. We weren't learning to speak. We were learning to speak better. To speak with more precision, more creativity, more power. And if that's true, then every story, every myth, every fragment of oral tradition that humanity has preserved carries within it echoes of languages spoken by people who existed before the dawn of recorded history. Languages spoken in the cold caves of Europe by hybrid populations huddled around fires, telling stories we can no longer understand, but whose emotional resonance still shivers through us when we hear the oldest myths. Who were the first storytellers? Not the first anatomically modern humans. The first storytellers might have been Neanderthals or Denisovans or hybrid populations that emerged from their interactions. And the first stories might have been about the same things we still tell stories about today. Survival, love, death, the mysteries of the world, the desire to understand our place in it. In the caves of France and Spain, there are images painted on walls 40,000 years old. Bison, horses, handprints, abstract symbols. We call it art, but what if it's something more? What if these images are visual stories, narratives encoded in picture form because spoken language wasn't yet sophisticated enough to carry the complexity of what needed to be said? And what if the people who painted those images were drawing on traditions that went back even further, traditions passed down through generations of hybrid populations, refined and elaborated over thousands of years until they emerged in the Upper Paleolithic as the stunning, mysterious art we find in places like Lascaux and Altamira? There's a theory in linguistics called monogenesis. It proposes that all human languages descend from a single ancestral language spoken by a small population of humans sometime in the deep past. Most linguists consider it unprovable, because languages change so quickly that tracing them back more than 10 or 20,000 years is nearly impossible. But genetic evidence gives us a different kind of timescale. We know that all anatomically modern humans descend from a relatively small population that lived in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. If language emerged in that population, then all human languages would indeed share a common ancestor. Except that's not the only possibility. If Neanderthals and Denisovans and the hybrid populations between them had language or proto-language, and if we absorbed not just their genes but their linguistic capabilities when we interbred with them, then our languages might be a synthesis. A blend of different linguistic traditions, each contributing different elements to the complex systems we use today. Imagine trying to piece together the original form of a song when all you have are 100 different covers, each one influenced by different musical traditions, each one adding new elements and removing old ones. That's what linguists are trying to do with human language. And the further back they go, the more tangled and mysterious the origins become. But there are clues. There are words that appear in unrelated languages, separated by vast distances and thousands of years, that nonetheless sound similar and carry similar meanings. The word for mother, for example, tends to start with an M sound in languages around the world. Mama, mater, mother. This might be coincidence, a consequence of the fact that M is one of the easiest sounds for infants to produce. But it might also be a vestige, a fragment of a word so ancient that it survived the divergence of all human languages. What else has survived? What other pieces of that original linguistic system still echo through the thousands of languages spoken today? And more unsettling still, if language has roots that extend back into our hidden epoch, if it emerged from the interactions of multiple hominin populations, then the way we think, the categories we use to organize reality, the very structure of consciousness itself might not be purely human in the narrow sense. It might be a synthesis, a blending of different cognitive traditions that came together during those 30,000 years when the boundaries between species blurred. There's a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. You may have heard of it. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. It's 11,000 years old, predating Stonehenge by 6 millennia and the pyramids of Egypt by 7. For decades after its discovery, Göbekli Tepe stood as the oldest known monumental architecture in the world, a stunning anomaly that suggested civilization emerged much earlier and much more suddenly than anyone had imagined. But here's what makes it relevant to our hidden epoch. The knowledge required to build Göbekli Tepe didn't appear overnight. The people who quarried those massive stones, who carved them with such precision, who organized the labor required to move and erect them, were drawing on traditions of craftsmanship and organization that must have extended back thousands of years. And when you trace those traditions backward, when you follow the evidence of human capability and innovation deeper into the past, you arrive inevitably at our hidden epoch. 30,000 years ago, somewhere in the cold landscapes of Ice Age Europe, people were already thinking about large-scale projects. They were mining flint from deep underground, digging shafts and tunnels to extract the highest quality stone. They were organizing trade networks that stretched hundreds of miles, moving exotic materials like amber and shells across vast distances. They were building structures, not yet monumental, but substantial enough to require planning and cooperation. These weren't random innovations. They were part of a cultural tradition, a body of knowledge about how to work stone, how to organize labor, how to think about projects that would take years to complete. And that tradition didn't begin with the Upper Paleolithic explosion. It was already there, circulating among the hybrid populations, waiting. In Siberia, at a site called Malta, archaeologists found evidence of substantial dwellings built 24,000 years ago. Not simple shelters, but engineered structures with foundations dug into the permafrost, walls built from carefully arranged mammoth bones, roofs covered with hides and sod. These were houses meant to last, built by people who understood architecture and who had the tools and knowledge to shape their environment. But the most remarkable finds at Malta were the figurines. Small carvings of women, rendered in exquisite detail, each face different, each body unique. These are known as Venus figurines, and similar ones have been found across Europe and Asia, all dating to roughly the same period. For years, archaeologists debated their purpose. Fertility symbols? Religious icons? Toys? But recently, a new interpretation has emerged. These figurines might be portraits, not abstract representations of womanhood, but specific individuals, crafted with care and perhaps even love, meant to preserve the memory of particular people. If that's true, if these figurines are portraits, then they represent something profound, the recognition of individual identity, the desire to preserve memory across time, the understanding that people matter not just as members of a group but as unique, irreplaceable selves. This is consciousness in its fullest form. Not just awareness but self-awareness. Not just thought but reflection. And it was present 24,000 years ago, in the heart of our hidden epoch, among populations that carried the genetic legacy of multiple hominin lineages. Who were they remembering when they carved those faces? Their mothers? Their lovers? Their dead? And what stories did they tell about the ones who came before, the Neanderthals and Denisovans and ghost populations whose genes they carried? Did they know? Did they sense, in some dim way, that they were not purely one thing but a mixture, a synthesis? There's a pattern in the archaeological record that becomes clear when you look at the distribution of innovations across space and time. New technologies, new art styles, new ways of doing things don't appear randomly. They appear in clusters in specific regions during specific periods, and then they spread. This is what we'd expect if knowledge was being transmitted through contact and interaction rather than being independently invented again and again. And during our hidden epoch, those networks of contact were extensive. People were moving, migrating, meeting, exchanging. The genetic evidence proves it. The tools prove it. The symbols prove it. But there's something else those networks might have transmitted. Something less tangible but perhaps more important. Stories. Every human culture we know of has myths about a time before time, a lost golden age when gods or ancestors or great heroes walked the earth. The details vary, but the structure is consistent. There was a time when the world was different, when knowledge was greater, when humanity was closer to something sacred or powerful. We tend to dismiss these myths as fantasy, as primitive attempts to explain the world before science gave us better answers. But what if they're memories? Not literal, not historically accurate in the way we understand history, but memories nonetheless. Distorted, metaphorical, but rooted in something real. What if the golden age our ancestors spoke of was the hybrid epoch? A time when multiple forms of humanity lived side by side, when the genetic and cultural diversity of our species was at its peak, when knowledge circulated freely because there were so many different populations contributing to the common pool. And what if the fall, the loss of the golden age that features in so many myths, is the memory of what happened when those populations disappeared? When the Neanderthals went extinct, when the Denisovans faded into obscurity, when the hybrid groups were absorbed into the expanding modern human populations and their distinct identities vanished. We didn't just lose species, we lost perspectives, ways of thinking, ways of being human that were different from the one that ultimately prevailed. And some part of us, buried deep in our cultural memory, has never stopped grieving that loss. Imagine being one of the last hybrids, living 30,000 years ago in a cave somewhere in Europe. You carry Neanderthal genes, Denisovan genes, modern human genes. You've learned from all of them. Your people have stories about the time when the different groups were distinct, when the old ones lived in the western valleys and the newcomers came from the south. But now the boundaries are blurring. Everyone is mixing. The old ones are fewer every year. Their knowledge is being forgotten or absorbed or transformed into something new. You sense that something is ending and something else is beginning. Let me tell you about something that happened in the year 2021. A team of scientists in Sweden used artificial intelligence to analyze the genomes of ancient humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. They were looking for stretches of DNA that showed signs of positive selection, meaning they had spread rapidly through populations because they conferred some significant advantage. What they found shocked them. Several of the genes under the strongest positive selection during our hidden epoch were related to brain development and neural function. Not just any genes, but ones specifically involved in the growth and organization of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for abstract thinking, planning, social behavior, and complex decision-making. And here's the critical part. Some of those genes came from Neanderthals. Some came from Denisovans. They weren't part of the original modern human package. We inherited them through interbreeding, and then natural selection favored them so strongly that they spread through our ancestors' populations in a matter of a few thousand years. What this means is that the cognitive capabilities that make us human, the very architecture of our minds, was under construction during our hidden epoch. And the construction materials came from multiple sources. We literally built our brains from pieces of other species. Think about that. The way you think right now, the neural patterns firing in your prefrontal cortex as you process these words, is shaped by genes that originated in hominin populations that went extinct tens of thousands of years ago. You are thinking Neanderthal thoughts in a sense. Or rather, you're thinking thoughts that are only possible because your brain contains neural structures influenced by Neanderthal genes. What were those structures originally used for? What challenges did Neanderthals face that required the particular configuration of neurons those genes helped create? We don't know. But whatever it was, we benefited from it. We incorporated it. We made it part of us. And the same is true for Denisovan genes, and for genes from the ghost populations we haven't even identified yet. Each contributed something, some enhancement or modification to our cognitive toolkit that proved so valuable that it became fixed in our lineage. Our hidden epoch wasn't just a period of genetic mixing. It was a period of cognitive evolution. Rapid, intense, driven by the creative potential of bringing together different neural architectures and seeing what emerged. This is why the cultural explosion happened when it did. Not because anatomically modern humans suddenly became smarter around 40,000 years ago, but because the genetic mixing of the preceding millennia had created a new kind of brain. A hybrid brain. One capable of things that neither parent population could do alone. Language became more sophisticated because we had neural structures from multiple lineages contributing to language processing. Art became more complex because we had visual and motor systems refined by different evolutionary pressures now working together. Toolmaking reached new levels because we combined Neanderthal precision and modern human innovation in a single cognitive system. We became greater than the sum of our parts. But there's a darker implication here as well. If our cognitive abilities are built from borrowed genes that evolved in populations adapted to environments and challenges very different from those faced by anatomically modern humans, then there might be mismatches, glitches, parts of our brain architecture that don't quite fit together perfectly because they evolved separately and were only recently combined. Some researchers think this might explain certain aspects of human psychology that seem maladaptive. Why do we suffer from anxiety disorders at such high rates? Why is depression so common? Why do our brains seem predisposed to believe in supernatural entities and conspiracy theories? Maybe because we're running software, neural programs, that evolved for different purposes and different environments. A Neanderthal gene that helped with hypervigilance in a world full of predators might manifest as chronic anxiety in a modern urban environment. A Denisovan gene that enhanced pattern recognition might make us see connections and agencies where none exist. We are, neurologically speaking, chimeras, and like all chimeras, we're a bit unstable, a bit contradictory, capable of extraordinary things but also prone to dysfunction. But here's what fascinates me most. If our hidden epoch was the crucible in which human cognition was forged, then the way we think, the categories we use to understand reality, might not be universal. They might be specific to the particular combination of genetic lineages that happened to come together during those 30,000 years. What if there were other ways to be cognitively sophisticated? Other neural architectures that were just as complex, just as capable, but fundamentally different from ours? What if the Neanderthals, if they had survived, would have developed a civilization entirely unlike ours, based on cognitive structures we can barely imagine? We'll never know because they're gone. And the hybrid populations that carried the purest mix of their genes are gone too. What survived is us. The lineage that happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right combination of inherited traits. But it could have been different. There's nothing inevitable about our form of cognition, our way of thinking. It's the product of historical contingency, of accidents of geography and climate and population dynamics during a very specific period. Our hidden epoch wasn't just the time when humanity became modern. It was the time when humanity became this particular version of modern, this specific way of being human that now dominates the entire planet. And locked in our genes, in the stretches of DNA inherited from populations that no longer exist, are the traces of other ways we might have been. Other forms of humanity that flickered briefly in the cold light of the Pleistocene and then vanished, leaving only these ghostly signatures in our genomes. When you feel the pull of something you can't quite name, when you sense a knowledge just beyond reach, when you look at the stars and feel an inexplicable connection to something vast and ancient, maybe what you're feeling is the echo of those other ways of being human. The Neanderthal within you, reaching for something the modern human part doesn't understand. The Denisovan neurons firing in patterns that almost, but not quite, make sense. You are a bridge. A living testament to 30,000 years of mixing and merging and becoming. And you carry within you the potential, perhaps, to remember what was lost. To reconstruct, even partially, the forms of consciousness that existed before the boundaries between species finally dissolved. In the Dordogne region of France, there's a valley where ancient humans lived for over 30,000 years. The cliffs are honeycombed with caves, and almost every one of them contains evidence of habitation. Stone tools, animal bones, hearths, and paintings. The paintings are what draw people today, tourists and researchers alike. Horses galloping across rock walls. Bison rendered with such anatomical precision that you can see individual muscles. Human hands, stenciled in red ochre, reaching across millennia. But what strikes me whenever I think about this valley isn't the paintings themselves. It's the continuity. 30,000 years of human presence in one place. Generations beyond counting, each one learning from the last, each one adding something new to the tradition, until the tradition became something almost sacred. Who were the first people to shelter in those caves? What did they look like? Were they fully modern humans? Or were they hybrids, carrying visible traces of Neanderthal ancestry? And when the later inhabitants painted over the older paintings, were they aware that they were covering the work of people who might have been, in some fundamental way, different from themselves? The valley is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of human activity, each generation writing over the last but never quite erasing it completely. And if you know how to look, if you know what to look for, you can still see the older layers showing through. This is what our hidden epoch is. Palimpsest, the story of how we became human, written and written again, until the original text is barely legible. But it's there. In the genes. In the artifacts. In the strange anomalies that don't quite fit the standard narrative. We just have to be willing to look. There's a question that's bothered me for years, ever since I started studying this period in depth. It's a simple question, but I've never found a satisfactory answer. Why do we care so much about our origins? Not just academically, not just as a matter of scientific curiosity, but viscerally, emotionally. Why does it matter to us where we came from? Every culture has origin myths. Every religion has a creation story. We are obsessed as a species with the question of how we began. And I think the reason is this: we sense that understanding our origins will help us understand what we are. And more importantly, what we could be. If we're simply the linear descendants of a single lineage, if we emerged fully formed from Africa and spread across the world, then our nature is fixed. We are what evolution made us, and there's little room for fundamental change. But if we're hybrids, if we're the product of multiple lineages coming together in a brief, explosive period of creativity and synthesis, then our nature is more fluid, more potential. We contain multitudes, literally, and those different lineages might express themselves in different ways depending on circumstances. This isn't just abstract philosophy. It has real implications for how we think about human diversity, human potential, even human rights. If we're all carrying genes from Neanderthals and Denisovans and ghost populations, then the boundaries between us, the lines we draw between races and ethnicities, become even more arbitrary than they already were. We are, all of us, mongrels, mixtures, and there's a strange beauty in that, I think. A hope, because if we're hybrids, if our greatness comes from synthesis rather than purity, then our future might lie in even more synthesis, more mixing, more cross-pollination of ideas and cultures and traditions. The hidden epoch teaches us that innovation doesn't come from isolation. It comes from contact, from the collision of different ways of thinking, different ways of being, and the emergence of something new from that collision. We are who we are because 30,000 years ago, different populations met and merged instead of remaining apart. And maybe, just maybe, we can become something even greater if we embrace that legacy instead of fearing it. But there's a sadness here too, because along with the synthesis came loss. The distinct identities of the parent populations disappeared. Neanderthals don't exist anymore, not as a separate people with their own culture and their own way of moving through the world. They exist only as fragments, genetic echoes in our DNA, glimpses of something that once was but is no more. And we can never get that back. We can study them, analyze them, try to reconstruct their lives from the scraps they left behind. But we can't speak with them. We can't ask them what they thought, what they felt, what they dreamed about when they huddled in their caves during the long Ice Age winters. That knowledge is gone forever, and something precious was lost when it went. There's a word the Greeks used, apokatastasis. It means the restoration of all things, the return to a primordial state of unity before everything fell into separation and conflict. It's a theological concept mostly, but I think it applies here too. Maybe what we sense when we study our hidden epoch, when we contemplate the hybrid populations that gave rise to us, is a longing for apokatastasis, a desire to restore what was lost when the different forms of humanity merged into one, to recover the perspectives, the ways of knowing, that disappeared when the boundaries finally dissolved. We can't do that, not fully, but perhaps we can approach it by studying the evidence with open minds, by resisting the urge to force everything into neat categories, by acknowledging that the past was messier, stranger, more complex than we usually admit, and by recognizing that we ourselves are living evidence of that complexity. Every one of us is a little bit Neanderthal, a little bit Denisovan, a little bit something else we haven't even identified yet. We are mosaics of ancient lineages, and when we learn about them, we're learning about ourselves. So here's my question to you, listening now in whatever corner of the world you inhabit. What do you feel when you contemplate your own hybridity? Does it trouble you or comfort you? Does it make you feel less human or more? Because I think the answer to that question says something profound about how we see ourselves and our place in the story of life on this planet. Let's return to the tools one more time, because there's something I haven't told you yet. Something that might be the key to understanding what really happened during our hidden epoch. In 2022, researchers analyzing stone tools from a site in Morocco made a discovery that challenged everything we thought we knew about the spread of human technology. They found blades, sophisticated, carefully crafted blades, in layers dated to 90,000 years ago. 90,000 years. That's 50,000 years before the Upper Paleolithic, before the supposed technological revolution that swept across Europe and Asia. These blades were being made by people in Africa at a time when Neanderthals in Europe were supposedly the only other hominins on the planet, and they weren't making anything like these tools. But here's what makes it relevant to our hidden epoch. The technology that produced those Moroccan blades didn't spread. Or rather, it spread and then disappeared and then reappeared much later, as if the knowledge had been lost and then rediscovered. This pattern repeats throughout the archaeological record of our hidden epoch. Innovations appear, flourish for a while, and then vanish only to resurface millennia later. Sophisticated tool types, artistic traditions, burial practices, they come and go like waves, each one leaving a trace but never quite establishing a continuous presence. Why? If these technologies were so effective, why didn't they spread and persist? The answer, I think, is that the populations carrying them didn't persist. Or rather, they were absorbed into other populations, and in the process of absorption, some of their knowledge was preserved while other parts were lost. It's like a game of telephone played across thousands of years and hundreds of generations, with the message getting garbled and simplified even as certain elements remain strikingly intact. But sometimes, rarely, the message comes through clear, and when it does, it's breathtaking. There's a site in South Africa called Blombos Cave. 75,000 years ago, people living there were creating abstract art. Not simple marks or scratches, but intentional geometric patterns carved onto pieces of ochre, crosshatches, parallel lines, designs that required planning and careful execution. They were also making beads from seashells, drilling perfect holes through them and stringing them into necklaces or bracelets. They were mixing ochre with other materials to create a kind of paint or adhesive. They were, in short, engaging in fully symbolic behavior 75,000 years ago, long before such behavior was supposed to be possible. And then, for reasons we don't understand, it stopped. The site was abandoned. The tradition ended. And we don't see comparable levels of sophistication in the archaeological record for another 30 or 40,000 years. What happened? Did the population at Blombos die out? Did they migrate elsewhere and lose the knowledge in the process? Or did they continue, but in regions we haven't excavated yet, or in coastal areas now underwater? We don't know. But the existence of Blombos Cave proves that the capacity for symbolic behavior didn't emerge suddenly 30,000 years ago. It was there much earlier. And if it was there in Africa 75,000 years ago, it might have been there in other places too. In Europe, in Asia, in the hybrid populations descended from the interbreeding of modern humans with Neanderthals and Denisovans. This changes everything. Because if the capacity was already there, then what happened during the Upper Paleolithic wasn't the sudden appearance of a new ability. It was the successful transmission and preservation of an ability that had flickered in and out of existence for tens of thousands of years. Our hidden epoch was when the flickers finally became a flame, when the knowledge finally stuck, when populations became large enough and interconnected enough that cultural innovations could spread and persist instead of dying out in isolated groups. But to get there, to reach that critical threshold, required the mixing of multiple populations. Because each population carried different pieces of the puzzle, different innovations, different ways of thinking. The Neanderthals had precision tool-making techniques refined over hundreds of thousands of years. The Denisovans, living in the harsh environments of Central and Eastern Asia, had developed technologies for surviving extreme cold and high altitude. The modern humans coming out of Africa brought new ways of organizing social groups and new artistic traditions. When these populations met, when they interbred and exchanged ideas, the pieces came together. Not all at once, not in a single generation, but gradually over thousands of years, the hybrid populations that emerged from those interactions assembled a toolkit, both literal and cognitive, that was more sophisticated than any single population had possessed. And 30,000 years ago, the assembly was complete. The flame caught, and humanity, the humanity we recognize today, burst forth in a wave of creativity and innovation that spread across the world. But we shouldn't think of it as progress in a linear sense. It wasn't better in some absolute way. It was different, and it survived because the conditions of the time favored that particular combination of traits. If the climate had been different, if the ice sheets had retreated earlier or advanced further, if population densities had been higher or lower, a different combination might have succeeded. A different form of humanity might have emerged. We are the ones who made it through the filter of the hidden epoch. But we're not the only ones who could have. And locked in our genes and our cultural memory are the traces of those other possibilities. Other ways the story might have gone. When I think about this, I feel a kind of vertigo, because it means that human nature isn't fixed. It's contingent, historical, We are who we are because of specific events that occurred during a specific period under specific circumstances. Change any of those variables and we might have been something else entirely. And yet, here we are. The result of all those accidents and contingencies. A species capable of contemplating its own origins, of tracing its lineage back through 30,000 years of mixing and merging and becoming. We are the children of the hidden epoch. And we carry its mysteries within us still. There's one more thing I need to tell you. One more piece of the puzzle that might help us understand what we've lost and what we've become. In recent years, researchers have begun studying what they call cultural transmission networks in the Paleolithic. Using mathematical models and computer simulations, they're trying to understand how knowledge spread among ancient populations. How a new tool design invented in one region might appear hundreds of miles away years later. How artistic styles propagated. How languages diverged and converged. And what they're finding is this: the most successful innovations, the ones that spread furthest and lasted longest, weren't necessarily the most efficient or the most sophisticated. They were the ones that were easiest to teach and learn. The ones that could be transmitted accurately from one person to another, from one generation to the next with minimal loss of information. This might seem obvious, but it has profound implications for our understanding of the hidden epoch. Because it suggests that what survived from the hybrid populations wasn't necessarily their greatest achievements. It was their most transmissible knowledge. Complex ideas, sophisticated technologies that required years of training to master, unique insights that emerged from particular cognitive structures. These might have been lost simply because they couldn't be effectively communicated across the boundaries between populations. What we inherited, what we became, was shaped as much by the limitations of cultural transmission as by the capabilities of the people involved. So when we look at the explosion of culture 30,000 years ago and marvel at its sophistication, we should also pause and wonder, what are we not seeing? What innovations flickered briefly in the minds of hybrid populations during the hidden epoch, but died with them because they couldn't be passed on? Maybe the Neanderthals, with their different neural architecture, experienced consciousness in ways we literally cannot imagine. Maybe they had forms of communication that didn't rely on sequential language, or ways of thinking about time and space that our cognitive structures don't support. And maybe when they disappeared, when their distinct lineage finally dissolved into the expanding modern human population, those ways of being vanished too. Not because they were inferior, but because they were incompatible with the cultural transmission systems that came to dominate. We won the hidden epoch. But winning might just mean that our way of thinking was easier to spread, not that it was better in any absolute sense. This is the great tragedy and the great mystery at the heart of human evolution. We are a species that survives through culture, through the transmission of knowledge across generations. But cultural transmission is a filter, preserves some things and loses others. And what gets lost might be just as important, just as valuable as what gets preserved. Our hidden epoch was a time when multiple forms of humanity coexisted, each with their own knowledge, their own ways of being. The mixing of those populations created something new, something powerful. But it also meant the end of diversity, the end of alternative ways of being human. And we can never know what we lost in that process. We can only sense it in the gaps in the fossil record, in the anomalous tools that don't quite fit our narratives, in the strange persistence of certain ideas and images across cultures and millennia. Somewhere in the deep past, in those 30,000 years between the decline of the Neanderthals and the rise of recognizably modern cultures, there were people who knew things we don't know, who experienced the world in ways we can't experience, who had solved problems we're still struggling with. And then they were gone, absorbed into us, their knowledge diluted, fragmented, transformed beyond recognition. But not entirely lost, because we carry their genes, and genes shape brains, and brains shape consciousness, and consciousness shapes culture. So maybe, just maybe, if we look carefully enough, if we're willing to see past our assumptions about what it means to be human, we can catch glimpses of those other ways of being. Recover fragments of the knowledge that was lost. Not through archaeology necessarily, not through genetics, but through introspection, through paying attention to the parts of our own minds that seem strange, atavistic, out of place. the impulses we can't explain, the intuitions that don't fit our rational models, the dreams that feel like memories of something we never experienced. Maybe those are the Neanderthal within us, speaking in a voice we've almost forgotten how to hear, or the Denisovan, or the ghost populations whose names we don't even know. We are a synthesis, and synthesis means that all the ingredients are still there, mixed together, transformed but not destroyed. The hidden epoch never truly ended. It's still happening, inside each of us, as the different lineages that make us human continue their ancient conversation in the language of neurons and genes. So when you lie down tonight, when you close your eyes and let your mind drift, pay attention. Pay attention to the thoughts that come from nowhere, the images that make no sense, the feelings that seem too old, too deep to be entirely yours. Those might be messages from the hidden epoch, echoes of the populations that gave rise to you, speaking across 30,000 years of silence. And if you listen carefully enough, if you're patient and open and willing to sit with mystery, you might hear something that hasn't been heard in ages. A whisper from the time before we were fully ourselves, before the boundaries were fixed, before humanity became singular. You might hear the voice of the many, still alive in the one. Tell me in the comments, in the darkness of your own contemplation, have you ever felt it? That sense of being more than yourself? Of carrying within you the weight of lineages stretching back into the unrecorded past? Because if you have, then you know. You know that the hidden epoch isn't hidden at all. It's right here, in you, in me, in all of us. We are the bridge populations. We always have been. And the question isn't what happened 30,000 years ago. The question is what's happening now, as those ancient lineages continue to express themselves through us, shaping who we are and who we might become. The mystery isn't back there, in the frozen caves and buried bones. The mystery is here, walking, breathing, wondering. The mystery is you. Before we part, let me take you to one more place. One more moment in our hidden epoch that I think captures everything we've been exploring. It's a winter night, 35,000 years ago. The location doesn't matter. Could be anywhere along the vast expanse of Ice Age Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains. What matters is the people. There's a group of them, perhaps 20 or 30 individuals, sheltering in a cave. Outside, the wind howls across a landscape of ice and tundra. Inside, a fire burns, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Look at their faces. Really look. Some of them have the heavy brow ridges of Neanderthals, the robust facial structure that speaks of hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to the cold. Others have the higher foreheads, the lighter builds of anatomically modern humans. Most are somewhere in between. Hybrids, mixtures, living bridges between lineages. They're eating, sharing meat from a kill made earlier in the day. The hunt required cooperation, planning, sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. They used weapons of their own design, spear throwers that amplified the force of their arms, allowing them to kill from a distance. This technology is new. Within a few generations, it will spread across thousands of miles. But right now, in this moment, it's just theirs. Their innovation, their advantage. After the meal, as the fire burns down to coals, someone starts to speak. It might be a story. It might be a recounting of the day's hunt, elaborated with details, with drama, with humor. Or it might be something older, a tale passed down from the previous generation. A story about the ancestors, about the time when the world was different, when the old ones lived separately from the newcomers. The language they speak isn't one we'd recognize. It's older, stranger, possibly drawing on grammatical structures from multiple linguistic lineages. But it's rich, complex, capable of expressing abstract concepts, hypothetical scenarios, the full range of human thought and emotion. As the storyteller speaks, others listen. Children sitting close to the fire, hearing these tales for the first time. Adults who've heard them before but never tire of hearing them again. Elders who remember when the stories were told differently, who carry their own versions passed down from their own grandparents. This is cultural transmission in its most fundamental form. Knowledge flowing from one mind to another, through the medium of language, preserved in memory and retold, generation after generation. And what are they transmitting? Not just information, not just practical knowledge about where to hunt or how to make tools. They're transmitting identity, meaning, a sense of who they are and where they came from. They're transmitting memory. Now imagine one of the listeners, a young person maybe 15 or 16 years old. This person carries genes from 3 distinct lineages: Neanderthal, Denisovan, modern human. Their brain is literally a hybrid structure, neural pathways influenced by evolutionary histories that diverged hundreds of thousands of years ago now reunited in a single skull. What does the world look like through those eyes? What does consciousness feel like in that hybrid mind? We can't know. But we can imagine that it might be different from what we experience. Richer in some ways, more complex, capable of modes of perception or thought that don't quite fit the categories we use today. As they listen to the story, maybe they understand it on multiple levels simultaneously. The literal narrative, the metaphorical meaning, the emotional resonance, the social function of the storytelling itself. All of these layers processing at once, weaving together into a unified experience that we, with our more streamlined cognitive architecture, might struggle to replicate. And then, in a moment of insight, maybe they understand something new. A connection between ideas that no one has made before. A new way of thinking about a problem. An innovation waiting to be born. They'll share this insight with the others. It will spread through the group, be refined, be elaborated. And eventually, decades or centuries later, it will leave a trace in the archaeological record. A new tool design, a new artistic motif, a shift in settlement patterns that suggests a new way of organizing social life. And we, 35,000 years later, will find that trace and wonder where it came from, how it appeared seemingly out of nowhere, what it means. We'll construct our narratives. We'll fit it into our models. We'll explain it in terms of migration or diffusion or independent invention. But we'll miss the truth, because the truth is that it came from that moment, in that cave, in the mind of a hybrid individual whose very existence challenges our categories, who was neither one thing nor another, but something new, something that existed only briefly, in that narrow window of time when the boundaries between populations were fluid and anything seemed possible. This is what the hidden epoch was. Not a gap in the record, not a mystery to be solved, but a space of possibility. A time when humanity was multiple, diverse, creative in ways we can barely imagine. And then it ended. The populations merged completely. The boundaries dissolved. And we emerged. Singular, unified, powerful, but less diverse, less multiple, and perhaps in ways we're only beginning to understand, less capable of certain kinds of thought, certain ways of being, that were possible when the different lineages still existed in their more distinct forms. We gained much in becoming who we are. We gained global dominance. We gained the ability to cooperate in groups of millions. We gained technologies that allow us to reshape the planet. But we lost something too. We lost the other ways we might have been. The roads not taken. The forms of consciousness that flickered briefly in hybrid minds and then vanished when those populations were absorbed. And sometimes, in quiet moments, in dreams or meditation or those strange liminal states between waking and sleeping, maybe we remember. Not consciously, not with the kind of memory that can be put into words, but with something deeper, something cellular, genetic, the memory of being more than one thing, of carrying within a single body the legacy of multiple paths through evolutionary time, of being for a brief moment a crossroads, a meeting place, a synthesis of everything that came before. This is the gift of the hidden epoch. Not answers, not certainty, but a reminder that we are more than we think we are. More complex, more mysterious, more haunted by ghosts of what we once were and what we might have been. So where does this leave us? We've journeyed through 30,000 years of missing history. We've examined bones that don't quite fit our categories. Tools that appear before they should. Symbols that repeat across impossible distances. Genes that tell stories of mixing and merging, of populations coming together in the cold crucible of the Ice Age and forging something new. We've seen that the simple narrative modern humans emerged, spread, replaced all others is wrong. Too simple, too clean. The truth is messier, stranger, more beautiful and more tragic than we've wanted to admit. The truth is that we are mongrels, hybrids, the product of multiple lineages coming together during a brief window of time when the boundaries between species were fluid. The truth is that Neanderthals and Denisovans and ghost populations we haven't even named didn't simply go extinct. They became us. Their genes flow through our veins. Their neural structures shape our brains. Their innovations echo through our cultures. The truth is that during our hidden epoch, there were forms of humanity that existed only briefly, hybrid populations that carried forward the legacy of multiple evolutionary paths before being absorbed into the expanding modern human tide. And the truth is that when those populations disappeared, something precious was lost. Ways of thinking, ways of being, perspectives on the world that we can never fully recover because we lack the cognitive structures that made them possible. But here's what gives me hope. The loss isn't complete, because we carry them within us. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, all the unnamed populations that contributed to our genome. They're not gone. They're dormant, waiting, and sometimes, in moments of insight or creativity, in dreams or visions or those strange experiences that feel like memory but can't possibly be, they wake up. They speak. They remind us that we're more than we think we are. This is why we're drawn to stories about lost civilizations, about ancient wisdom, about knowledge that was forgotten and must be recovered. Not because such civilizations necessarily existed in the literal sense, with cities and technologies matching our own, but because we carry within us the genetic memory of populations that knew things we don't know, that experienced the world in ways we can't quite access, that had solved problems we're still struggling with. The lost civilization isn't out there, waiting to be discovered in some remote corner of the earth or buried beneath the ice. It's in here, in our DNA, in the structure of our brains, in the strange, inexplicable aspects of our psychology that seem to make no sense in terms of our recent evolutionary history. We are the lost civilization. We've just forgotten how to remember. So how do we remember? How do we access the knowledge locked in our hybrid genomes? How do we recover the perspectives that were lost when the boundaries between populations finally dissolved? I don't have a complete answer, but I think it starts with humility, with acknowledging that our way of being human, the form of consciousness that currently dominates the planet, isn't the only possible way. It's the way that survived, but it's not necessarily superior to the ways that didn't. Continues with curiosity, with being willing to examine the anomalies, the things that don't fit our neat categories, instead of dismissing them or forcing them into frameworks they don't belong to. And it requires imagination, the ability to conceive of forms of consciousness genuinely different from our own. To recognize that a Neanderthal's inner life, a Denisovan's experience of the world, might have been as rich and complex as ours but oriented toward different concerns, structured by different cognitive architectures. If we can do that, if we can approach the hidden epoch not as a gap to be filled but as a space of possibility to be explored, then maybe we can learn something valuable. Maybe we can recover fragments of the knowledge that was lost. Maybe we can develop new ways of thinking that draw on the full range of our hybrid inheritance rather than privileging only the aspects that emerged victorious from the filter of cultural transmission. Maybe we can become more than we are by remembering everything we've been. This is speculative, of course. Hopeful. Perhaps overly romantic. But I don't think it's wrong, because the evidence is there. In the genes. In the tools. In the bones. The hidden epoch happened. Multiple forms of humanity existed. They interacted, interbred, exchanged ideas and genes and knowledge. And then they merged into something new. That's not speculation. That's established fact, supported by overwhelming evidence from multiple scientific disciplines. What remains speculative is the interpretation. What it means. What we lost. What we gained. What we might still recover. And that's where you come in. Because this isn't just ancient history. It's not just something that happened in the past and has no relevance to the present. The hidden epoch is ongoing. It's still unfolding. Inside each of us. as the different genetic lineages that make us human continue to express themselves in new combinations, new contexts, new environments. You are a hybrid. Your children will be hybrids, and their children after them. The mixing never really stopped. It just changed form. So pay attention to the strange parts of yourself. The impulses that don't fit. The thoughts that come from nowhere. The dreams that feel like memories. Those might be voices from the hidden epoch. Fragments of the populations that gave rise to you, still speaking across the millennia. And if enough of us listen, if enough of us pay attention, maybe we can reconstruct something valuable. Not the past exactly. We can never fully recover that. But something new. A synthesis that honors all the lineages that contributed to our existence rather than privileging only the one that happened to dominate. We are the children of the hidden epoch. We carry its mysteries within us. And the question isn't what happened 30,000 years ago. The question is what we do now with the inheritance they left us. How we honor the lost populations whose genes we carry. How we remember what they knew. How we become, finally, fully everything we have the potential to be. This is the challenge of our time. Not just to survive, but to thrive. To become worthy of the complex, beautiful, tragic legacy that is our hybrid nature. The hidden epoch forged us. Now we must forge ourselves anew, drawing on everything they gave us, everything they became, everything they knew and lost and remembered. The work begins with you, with me. With all of us who carry this legacy and must decide what to do with it. The hidden epoch is over, but its lessons remain. Will you listen? There's a question I ask myself sometimes. Late at night when the world is quiet and the boundaries between past and present seem thin. If you could go back, if you could stand in one of those caves 35,000 years ago and meet them, the hybrid populations of our hidden epoch, what would you say? Would you tell them what becomes of their world? That the ice will retreat, that the megafauna will disappear, that the populations they know will merge and transform into something they might not recognize? Would you tell them that their genes will survive, will spread across the entire planet, will shape the minds and bodies of billions of descendants they can't possibly imagine? Or would you say nothing? Just watch them live their lives, trying to understand what it's like to be human in that particular way, at that particular moment, carrying within a single mind the legacy of evolutionary paths that diverged 500,000 years ago. I think I would choose silence. Not because there's nothing to say, but because words would be inadequate. Because what we lost when those populations disappeared isn't something that can be put into language. It's experiential, phenomenological. It's the feeling of being human in a way we can never quite be again. But here's what I would hope they could see, if they looked forward through time the way we look back. That their legacy survived. That they weren't failures. That the mixing and merging that characterized their epoch wasn't a loss of identity but a transformation into something new and powerful. That we, their descendants, carry forward the best of all the lineages that contributed to our existence. Even if we've forgotten most of what they knew. Even if we've lost the diversity that made their time so rich. With possibility, we survived. And survival itself is a kind of triumph. But survival isn't enough. Not anymore. Not when we have the tools to look back, to study, to understand what happened during that crucial period. Because understanding the hidden epoch isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about understanding ourselves, our nature, our potential, the full range of what it means to be human. And maybe, just maybe, it's about recovering something we lost. Not literally. We can't bring back Neanderthals or Denisovans. We can't recreate the exact conditions that existed during the hidden epoch. But we can learn from it. We can recognize that the creativity and innovation that characterizes our species doesn't come from purity or isolation. It comes from mixing, from contact, from the synthesis of different traditions and perspectives and ways of thinking. This is as true now as it was 30,000 years ago. The most creative periods in human history have always been times and places where different cultures met and mingled, where ideas cross-pollinated, where the boundaries were fluid rather than rigid. The hidden epoch teaches us that this is how we became great, by being open, by mixing, by allowing ourselves to be transformed by contact with the other. And it warns us that when we close ourselves off, when we insist on purity and separation, we diminish ourselves. We cut ourselves off from the sources of innovation and adaptation that allowed our ancestors to survive in the first place. This isn't just philosophy. It's evolutionary wisdom, written in our genes and our history. We are hybrids. We have always been hybrids, and our future lies in embracing that reality rather than denying it. So here, at the end of our journey through the hidden epoch, I want to leave you with a challenge. The next time you look in a mirror, really look. See past the surface, past the individual features, past the person you think you are. Look deeper. See the Neanderthal in the strength of your bones, the precision of your hands. See the Denisovan in your ability to thrive in harsh environments, to adapt to extremes. See the ghost populations, unnamed and unknown, in the aspects of your psychology that seem to come from nowhere. See yourself as what you really are, a crossroads, a meeting place, a living testament to 30,000 years of mixing and merging and becoming. And then ask yourself, what would it mean to live in full acknowledgement of that hybrid nature? To honor all the lineages that contributed to your existence? To draw on the full range of your cognitive and genetic inheritance rather than limiting yourself to the narrow slice that contemporary culture considers normal? What would it mean to be fully, consciously, proudly hybrid? I don't have a simple answer, but I think the exploration is worthwhile. Because in that exploration, we might discover capabilities we didn't know we had. Perspectives we've been overlooking. Ways of being human that have been dormant for millennia but could be awakened. The hidden epoch isn't over. It never ended. It continues in you, in me, in all of us who carry the genetic legacy of those transformative 30,000 years. And what we do with that legacy, how we choose to understand and embody it, will shape our future as surely as it shaped our past. So listen to the voices in your DNA. Pay attention to the strange, inexplicable parts of yourself. Honor the ancestors, all of them, from all the lineages that came together to create you. And maybe, in doing so, you'll help create the next synthesis, the next great transformation, the next chapter in the ongoing story of what it means to be human. Because that story isn't finished. It's still being written. And you're one of the authors. The hidden epoch was the crucible that forged us. But the fire is still burning. The transformation is still happening. And the question isn't what happened back then. The question is what happens next. What do we become when we fully embrace our hybrid nature? When we stop trying to be one thing and accept that we're many things, always have been, always will be. What possibilities open up when we let go of the fiction of purity and embrace the reality of mixture? These are the questions the hidden epoch poses to us. Not as abstract intellectual puzzles, but as practical challenges for how we live our lives, organize our societies, think about our future. The answers won't come from archaeology or genetics alone. They'll come from each of us, as we grapple with the legacy we've inherited and decide what to do with it. The hidden epoch is calling, through the bones, through the genes, through the silent symbols that repeat across time and space. It's asking, what will you do with what we gave you? How will you honor the sacrifice of populations that merged and lost their distinct identities so that you could exist? How will you remember? I don't know if there's a right answer, but I know that asking the question, really sitting with it, is important. Because in that question lies the key to understanding not just where we came from, but where we're going. And maybe, just maybe, the hidden epoch will teach us something that could save us from ourselves. That diversity is strength. That mixing is creative. That the boundaries we draw between self and other are always provisional, always permeable. That we are and have always been more than we think we are. So sleep well, knowing that you carry within you the legacy of countless generations, multiple lineages, ancient wisdoms that survived against impossible odds. You are the miracle the hidden epoch made possible. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that. In the beginning, I asked you a question. What if the story we tell ourselves about becoming human is missing its most important chapter? We've spent these hours together exploring that missing chapter, the hidden epoch between the Neanderthals and us. 30,000 years of mixing and merging, of populations coming together and creating something new, something that would eventually spread across the entire planet and reshape it in ways no other species had ever done. We've examined the evidence, the bones that don't fit our categories, the tools that appear too early, the genes that tell stories of complex interactions between multiple hominin lineages. We've contemplated the implications. That our minds are hybrid structures, that our culture draws on traditions from populations that no longer exist, that we carry within us the legacy of forms of consciousness we can barely imagine. And through it all, we've tried to understand what was lost and what was gained in that transformative period. The creativity and innovation that came from synthesis. The perspectives and knowledge that disappeared when distinct populations merged into one. But now, as we reach the end of this journey, I want to circle back to something more personal, more immediate, because this isn't just a story about the past. It's a story about you. You listening now, wherever you are in the world. You are the direct result of everything we've been discussing. Every choice made by your ancestors during the hidden epoch, every mate they selected, every innovation they adopted, every migration they undertook, led directly to your existence. The hybrid populations we've been talking about aren't abstract historical entities. They're your grandparents many thousands of generations removed. And the genetic mixing that characterized the hidden epoch is still happening in you, as genes from different lineages express themselves in your development, your cognition, your very consciousness. So when we talk about recovering lost knowledge from the hidden epoch, we're not talking about archaeology or ancient DNA analysis, as important as those are. We're talking about looking inward, about paying attention to the parts of yourself that seem to come from somewhere deep, somewhere old, somewhere you can't quite name. Have you ever had a moment of insight that felt like remembering rather than discovering? A skill that came too naturally, as if you'd always known it? A dream that felt more like a memory of someone else's life? Maybe those are voices from the hidden epoch. Genetic memories, if such things exist. Or neural pathways laid down by genes inherited from populations that experience the world differently than we do, that solved problems in ways our modern minds have forgotten. I'm speculating, of course, wandering into territory that science hasn't fully explored. But speculation can be valuable, especially when it opens up new ways of thinking about old questions. And the question of what we lost during the hidden epoch, what knowledge disappeared when the hybrid populations were absorbed into the expanding modern human tide, is a question worth sitting with. Worth exploring from every angle, including the angles that feel more intuitive than rational. Because here's what I believe. The human mind is far more complex, far more mysterious than we usually acknowledge. We tend to think of ourselves as rational agents, making conscious decisions based on explicit reasoning. But most of what our brains do happens below the level of awareness. Processes inherited from ancestors who lived in worlds we can barely imagine, solving problems we no longer face. And those ancient processes, those deep structures laid down by evolution over hundreds of thousands of years, don't just disappear because circumstances change. They persist. They shape our perceptions, our reactions, our intuitions in ways we don't consciously recognize. What if some of those structures were inherited from Neanderthals, from Denisovans, from the hybrid populations of the hidden epoch who carried the combined wisdom of multiple lineages? What if, buried in your subconscious, there are ways of knowing that predate modern language, modern culture, maybe even modern consciousness as we understand it? And what if accessing those ways of knowing could give us insights we desperately need? New perspectives on problems that seem intractable when approached with our usual modes of thinking. This isn't mysticism. It's not New Age romanticism about ancient wisdom. It's a serious question about cognitive inheritance and the full range of human potential. We are, demonstrably, the product of multiple evolutionary lineages. Our genomes prove it, and genes shape brains. So it's not unreasonable to suggest that our cognitive capabilities, our ways of processing information and experiencing the world, might reflect that diverse inheritance. The question is how to access it, how to tap into aspects of our cognition that don't fit the narrow band of consciousness we call normal thought. Meditation might be one way, art another, dreams, altered states, any practice that quiets the chatter of modern conscious thought and allows deeper, older processes to surface. I don't have a map for this territory. Nobody does. But I think the territory exists, and I think exploring it might be one of the most important tasks facing our species. Because we're living in a time of profound transformation, just as our ancestors did during the hidden epoch. The world is changing rapidly. Old certainties are dissolving. New challenges are emerging that our traditional ways of thinking seem ill-equipped to handle. Maybe we need to draw on the full range of our inheritance. All the lineages that contributed to our existence. All the ways of being human that flickered briefly and then merged into the unified species we've become. Maybe we need to become hybrid in our consciousness, the way our ancestors were hybrid in their genetics. Open to multiple perspectives. Capable of holding contradictions. Comfortable with ambiguity and complexity. This is what the hidden epoch teaches us, if we're willing to listen. Not the specific answers to specific questions, but an approach. A way of being. Fluid. Adaptive. Creative in the way that only comes from synthesizing different traditions, different ways of knowing. Our ancestors survived the hidden epoch because they were willing to mix, to merge, to become something new. They didn't cling to purity. They embraced hybridity. And in doing so, they created us. Now it's our turn. Not to create a new species, biological evolution works too slowly for that. But to create a new consciousness. One that honors all aspects of our inheritance. One that draws on the full range of human cognitive potential, not just the slice that happened to dominate during the historical period. This is the gift and the challenge of the hidden epoch. To recognize that we're more than we think we are. To embrace the complexity of our nature. To become, consciously and deliberately, what our ancestors became through necessity and circumstance. Bridges between different ways of being. It won't be easy. It requires letting go of comfortable certainties, of simple identities, of the fiction that we're unified, consistent selves. But it might be necessary. For our survival. For our flourishing. For creating a future worthy of the incredible legacy we've inherited. The hidden epoch forged us. Now we must forge ourselves anew, drawing on everything they gave us, everything they became, everything they knew and lost and remembered. The work begins with you, with me, with all of us who carry this legacy and must decide what to do with it. The hidden epoch is over, but its lessons remain. Will you listen? So we've arrived at the end, though perhaps end isn't quite the right word, because the story we've been tracing doesn't really end. It continues in every breath you take, every thought you think, every moment of your existence, as a hybrid being carrying the legacy of multiple ancient lineages. Let me bring you back one final time to that cave 35,000 years ago. The fire has burned down to embers now. Most of the group is sleeping, curled against each other for warmth in the depths of the Ice Age night. But one person remains awake. Maybe it's the young hybrid we imagined earlier, the one who had the insight during the storytelling. Or maybe it's an elder, someone who's seen more winters than most and knows that each one might be their last. This person is looking at the fire, watching the coals pulse with dying heat. And in that liminal state between waking and sleeping, something happens. A moment of clarity. A vision, perhaps, or just a feeling. A sense of connection to something vast and ancient and ongoing. They understand, in that moment, that they're part of something larger than themselves. Larger than their group, their generation, even their species as they understand it. They're part of a process, an unfolding, a becoming that stretches back through countless generations and will continue long after they're gone. And maybe, in that understanding, they feel what you're feeling now. A kind of vertigo, an awe. The weight of ancestry and the lightness of being part of something so much greater than any individual life. This is the legacy of the hidden epoch. Not facts or dates or archaeological details, as important as those are, but this feeling, this recognition of our place in the grand sweep of evolutionary time. Our role as inheritors and transmitters of knowledge, genes, culture that flow through us but don't belong to us. We are not separate from the past. We are the past, made flesh, walking forward into an unknown future. And the more deeply we understand that, the more fully we can embody it, the richer our lives become. Because we stop seeing ourselves as isolated individuals, born by accident into an indifferent universe, destined to struggle alone until we die. Instead, we become part of a lineage, a tradition, a sacred trust to preserve and pass forward the gifts we've received from ancestors who endured unimaginable hardships so that we could exist. This is what the hidden epic teaches, finally. Not just facts about human evolution, but a way of being in the world. Connected, grateful, aware of the debt we owe to those who came before and the responsibility we bear to those who will come after. In traditional cultures, this understanding was maintained through ritual, through storytelling, through practices that reinforce the connection between past, present, and future. We've lost much of that in modern life. We live in an eternal present, cut off from our roots, uncertain of our direction. But the knowledge is still there, coded in our genes, waiting to be remembered. And the hidden epic, with all its mysteries and anomalies and unsettling implications, is calling us back to that deeper understanding. You are not alone. You have never been alone. You carry within you the voices of thousands of generations, the wisdom of populations that survived ice ages and extinctions and transformations we can barely comprehend. And when you feel lost, when the modern world becomes too much, when you need guidance or strength or perspective, you can turn to them. Not literally, of course, but through practices that quiet the mind and allow older, deeper parts of yourself to speak. This might sound mystical, and maybe it is in a sense, but it's also profoundly practical, because the challenges we face now, ecological collapse, technological disruption, social fragmentation, are novel in their specifics but ancient in their essence. Our ancestors faced existential threats too. They survived. And they left us the tools to survive, encoded not just in our DNA but in the deep structures of human culture, human psychology, human consciousness. We just need to remember how to access them. The hidden epic was a time of transformation. We're living through another such time now. And the strategies that worked then, openness to the other, willingness to adapt, creative synthesis of different traditions, might be precisely what we need now. Not to recreate the past. We can't do that and shouldn't try, but to learn from it, to draw on the full depth of our inheritance as we navigate an uncertain future. This is my final message, the thought I want you to carry with you as you drift off to sleep or continue about your day. You are enough. You carry within you everything you need. Not because you're special as an individual, but because you're the product of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back through the hidden epic, through the divergence of human lineages, through the emergence of our genus, all the way back to the first stirrings of consciousness in the warm seas of Earth's youth. That chain has never broken. Through ice ages and extinctions, through catastrophes we can barely imagine, it persisted. Your ancestors survived, and they passed to you everything they learned, everything they became. So when doubt creeps in, when fear threatens to overwhelm, remember, you are the descendant of survivors, of innovators, of populations that looked at impossible odds and found ways to continue. That strength is in you. That creativity is in you. That stubborn, inexplicable will to persist is in you. The hidden epic proved that humanity can transform, can synthesize, can become something new while honoring everything it was. We're being called to do that again now. To let go of old certainties and embrace new possibilities. To become, as our ancestors did, bridges between what was and what will be. It won't be easy. Transformation never is. But it's possible. The evidence is written in our genes, our bones, our history. We've done it before. We can do it again. So sleep well, knowing you're held by the vast net of ancestry stretching back into the unimaginable past. Rest, knowing you're part of a process that survived everything Earth could throw at it. And when you wake, remember, the hidden epic isn't hidden anymore. You've seen it. You've understood it. You carry it within you. Now live it. Honor it. Become the bridge, the synthesis, the next chapter in the ongoing story of what it means to be human. The ancestors are watching. The future is waiting. And you, right now, in this moment, are the hinge. Between them, what will you do with that sacred responsibility? What will you become? The hidden epic whispers. Anything, everything, whatever you must. You are their answer to the question of survival. Their hope made flesh. their legacy walking forward. Don't forget that, ever. Thank you for this journey. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this ongoing story. Until next time, wherever you are, may you sleep well in the knowledge of your deep, strange, beautiful inheritance. And may you wake ready to honor it. There's something I haven't mentioned yet, something that might tie together all the threads we've been following through our hidden epoch. It's about memory itself and how it works across scales of time we can barely comprehend. We think of memory as something personal, individual. Your memories are yours. They exist in the neural connections of your brain, encoded in patterns of synaptic strength and chemical signals. When you die, conventional wisdom says those memories die with you. But what if that's not entirely true? What if memory operates at other levels too, levels that transcend the individual? Geneticists talk about something called epigenetic inheritance. It's the idea that experiences can modify how genes are expressed, and these modifications can sometimes be passed to offspring. A grandmother who survived famine might pass on altered metabolic patterns to her grandchildren, even if they never experienced food scarcity themselves. The genes don't change, but the instructions for how and when to use them do. This is controversial. The mechanisms aren't fully understood, but the evidence keeps accumulating. Experiences leave marks on our genomes, marks that can persist across generations. Now imagine this process operating not over 2 or 3 generations, but over thousands. Over the entire span of our hidden epoch. Populations facing extreme challenges, developing responses, passing those responses on not just culturally but epigenetically. The memory of surviving the Ice Age, coded not in stories but in the chemical tags attached to DNA, instructions whispered from one generation to the next about how to endure, how to adapt, how to persist. Is this what we're sensing when we talk about genetic memory? Not literal memories of specific events, but something more subtle. Patterns of response, emotional templates, ways of reacting to stress or novelty or danger that were adaptive 30,000 years ago and still shape our behavior today. There's a phenomenon in psychology called collective unconscious. Carl Jung proposed it, suggesting that humans share deep psychological structures inherited from our species' past. Archetypes, he called them, universal patterns of thought and behavior that emerge across cultures, across time periods, as if drawing from some common wellspring of human experience. Jung's ideas have fallen somewhat out of favor in mainstream psychology, dismissed as too mystical, too unscientific. But what if he was pointing towards something real? What if the collective unconscious isn't some spiritual realm but simply the sum of our inherited cognitive structures, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, refined and elaborated during the intense selective pressures of our hidden epoch? The hybrid populations we've been discussing would have been uniquely positioned to create something like this. Bringing together cognitive structures from multiple lineages, they would have had access to a broader range of psychological responses, emotional patterns, ways of processing experience. The synthesis that emerged from that mixing might have been more flexible, more adaptive, more capable of responding to novel challenges than any single lineage could have produced. And when those hybrid populations became our ancestors, when they spread across the world and gave rise to all modern humans, they carried that psychological flexibility with them. It became part of our inheritance, part of what makes us human. This might explain why human psychology is so complex, so contradictory, why we're capable of both incredible cooperation and terrible violence, why we can be rational and irrational, compassionate and cruel, often within the span of minutes. We're not running a single coherent program. We're running multiple programs simultaneously, inherited from different lineages, occasionally conflicting with each other but also creating emergent possibilities that wouldn't exist if we were more psychologically unified. We are, psychologically, what we are genetically: hybrids, mixtures, beings composed of multiple traditions, multiple ways of being, held together in a synthesis that's both creative and unstable. And maybe that instability is a feature, not a bug. Maybe our psychological complexity, our contradictions, our capacity for both transcendence and self-destruction, is what allowed us to become the dominant species on this planet. Because we could adapt to anything, become anything, respond to any challenge with some combination of inherited responses drawn from the deep well of our hybrid past. The hidden epoch didn't just shape our bodies or our basic cognitive capacities. It shaped our souls, if such a word makes sense. The fundamental texture of what it feels like to be human, with all our contradictions and complexities and mysterious depths. And this brings us to a profound question. If our psychology is inherited from hybrid populations that mixed and merged during the hidden epoch, then what does it mean to be true to our nature? What does authenticity look like for a species that's fundamentally multiple, composed of different lineages with different histories and different adaptive strategies? Maybe it means embracing the contradictions, acknowledging that we contain multitudes, that different situations call forth different aspects of our inheritance, that there's no single true self to be discovered, but rather a rich complexity to be explored and expressed. Maybe it means recognizing that the tensions we feel, between reason and emotion, between individual and group, between exploration and security, aren't problems to be solved but dynamics to be navigated. They're built into us, part of our hybrid nature, and they've served us well for 30,000 years. Maybe it means being more forgiving of ourselves and others when we act in ways that seem inconsistent. Because inconsistency might be the most consistent thing about us. We're not designed to be simple. We're designed to be adaptable. And adaptability requires having multiple strategies available, even if they sometimes conflict. The hidden epoch created us as beings capable of holding opposites, of being multiple things at once, of drawing on different aspects of our inheritance depending on context and need. This is why we're so hard to understand, so hard to predict, why no single theory of human nature can capture us completely, why every ideology that tries to reduce us to a single essence ends up distorting what we are. We're not one thing. We never have been. We're the product of a unique moment in evolutionary history when multiple forms of humanity came together and created something new, something complex, something that carried forward pieces of everyone who came before. And that complexity, that multiplicity, that fundamental hybridity is our greatest asset. It's what allowed us to spread across every environment on Earth, to create thousands of different cultures, to continuously reinvent ourselves in response to changing circumstances. The hidden epoch taught us how to be many things. Now we need to remember that lesson, to embrace our complexity rather than trying to simplify ourselves, to draw on the full range of our inheritance rather than limiting ourselves to narrow definitions of what it means to be human. Because the challenges ahead will require everything we've got, every strategy, every insight, every way of being that our ancestors developed over hundreds of thousands of years and synthesized during those crucial 30 millennia. We are the children of the hidden epoch, hybrid in body, hybrid in mind, hybrid in soul. And our power comes from embracing that hybridity, not denying it. Let me tell you about a dream I had once. Or perhaps it was a vision. The line between the two seems thinner when you spend your days immersed in deep time, in the shadows of extinct populations, in the genetic echoes of beings who are both utterly alien and fundamentally us. In the dream, I was standing on a vast plain. Ice covered the ground, and the wind carried particles of snow that stung my face. The sky was enormous, clear, filled with more stars than I had ever seen. The kind of sky that existed before light pollution, when humans looked up at night and saw the full glory of the cosmos. And I wasn't alone. There were others on the plain with me, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, but they weren't all the same. Some were tall and slender, with the gracile build of modern humans. Others were shorter, more robust, with heavy brow ridges and powerful frames. Still others seemed to be something in between, exhibiting features of both types, or perhaps of neither. We were all walking in the same direction, though I couldn't see our destination. And as we walked, we were singing. Not words exactly, but vocalizations. Harmonies that wove together, each group contributing their own part, creating something more complex and beautiful than any single voice could produce. And then I understood. This was the hidden epoch. This was what it might have felt like to be alive during that transformative period, when humanity was still multiple, when different populations walked the same paths and contributed their voices to a collective song that none of us can hear anymore because the last of those voices fell silent 30,000 years ago. I woke from that dream with tears on my face, mourning something I never experienced, missing people I never knew, grieving for a diversity that was lost long before I was born, but also feeling something else, a sense of connection, of belonging to something vast, of being part of a story so much larger than my individual life that it renders my personal concerns almost irrelevant. This is what the hidden epic does to you if you let it. It changes your sense of scale. It makes you realize that the human story is far deeper, far stranger, far more tragic and beautiful than the simple narratives we usually tell. We didn't emerge from a single source and spread across the world in a clean wave of progress. We came together from multiple sources, merged and mixed, lost some parts of ourselves and gained others, became something new while carrying forward echoes of everything we had been. And that process, that alchemical transformation from multiple populations into a single, unified, global species, happened during our hidden epoch. In those 30,000 years that we're only now beginning to understand. So when I think about that period, I don't just think about bones and tools and genetic sequences. I think about lived experience, about what it must have felt like to be one of those people, living in a world where humanity was still taking shape, where the boundaries between populations were fluid, where every encounter with the other might be the beginning of something entirely new. Imagine being a young person during that time, coming of age in a hybrid community. You look around and see that your people are different from each other. Some have more Neanderthal features, others more modern human traits. But you're all family, all working together to survive the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. And then one day a group of strangers appears. They speak a language that's almost but not quite like yours. Their tools are slightly different. Their way of working leather, of processing food, of organizing their social life shows variations you haven't seen before. Do you fear them? Attack them? Or do you welcome them? Learn from them? Invite them to share your fire, and your food, and eventually your genes? The evidence suggests that more often than not, our ancestors chose welcome over fear. They chose mixing over purity. They chose to become something new rather than remain what they were. And that choice, made again and again over thousands of years by countless individuals whose names we'll never know, created us, made us possible, gave us the gift of existence. We owe them everything. These nameless, faceless people of the hidden epoch who chose openness over closure, synthesis over separation. They couldn't have known what they were creating, couldn't have imagined that their choices would lead 30,000 years later to a global civilization of billions, to technologies that would have seemed like magic, to knowledge that spanned from the quantum realm to the edges of the observable universe. They were just trying to survive, to make it through another winter, to find enough food, to protect their children, to pass on what they knew to the next generation. But in doing so, in making those simple human choices, they shaped the trajectory of an entire species. They determined what we would become. And now we face our own choices, our own transformation, our own hidden epoch, perhaps, though we can't see it clearly because we're living through it. The world is changing faster than at any time in human history. Climate shifting, technologies emerging that blur the line between human and machine, cultures mixing on a scale unprecedented since the Ice Age, boundaries dissolving between nations, between ideologies, between ways of being. It's frightening, disorienting. Many people respond with fear, with a retreat into tribalism, with attempts to erect walls and maintain purity and keep the other at bay. But the hidden epoch teaches us a different lesson. It teaches us that transformation, though painful, can be creative. That mixing, though it means the loss of distinct identities, can create something greater than what existed before. That openness, though it brings risk, is the path to survival. We are the proof. We are the evidence that choosing synthesis over separation works. That hybrid vigor is real. That the future belongs not to those who cling to purity but to those who embrace complexity. So when the future seems uncertain, when change feels overwhelming, when you're tempted to retreat into simple certainties and clear boundaries, remember the hidden epoch. Remember the people who lived through the last great transformation of humanity. Remember that they survived, thrived, created something extraordinary, and remember that their legacy lives in you, their strength, their adaptability, their willingness to become something new. You are their descendant, and you carry within you everything you need to navigate the transformation ahead. The hidden epoch isn't just history. It's a map, a guide, a reminder of what's possible when we choose courage over fear, openness over closure, synthesis over separation. Our ancestors walked through the fire of transformation and emerged as something new and powerful. They left us their genes, their innovations, their spirit. Now it's our turn to walk through fire, to face transformation, to become whatever we must become to survive and flourish in a rapidly changing world. The hidden epoch proved it's possible. Now we must prove it again. Are you ready? Because ready or not, the transformation is coming. The only question is whether we'll face it as our ancestors did, with courage, openness, and a willingness to become something new, or whether we'll resist, and in resisting, fail to honor the incredible legacy they left us. I know what choice I'm making. I know what the hidden epoch teaches. I choose transformation. I choose mixing. I choose to become. What about you? There's one final thing I want to share with you before we part. A meditation, perhaps, or a prayer. Something that might help you carry the lessons of the hidden epoch forward into your own life. Close your eyes if you're in a place where you can do so safely. Take a deep breath. Feel the air entering your lungs, filling your body with oxygen. The same oxygen that sustained your ancestors through countless generations. Now imagine that with each breath you're breathing in time. Deep time. Evolutionary time. With each inhalation you draw in millennia. With each exhalation you release them only to draw in more. Breathe in the hidden epoch. Those 30,000 years when humanity was multiple, diverse, creative in ways we can barely imagine. Feel the presence of those populations. Neanderthals with their robust frames and their precision tools. Denisovans adapted to the harsh highlands of Asia. Modern humans spreading out of Africa. And all the hybrid populations between them mixing and merging and becoming. They're not gone. They're in you, in every cell, in every gene, in the structure of your brain and the chemistry of your emotions and the deep patterns of how you think. Breathe them in. Welcome them. Acknowledge them. Now breathe in deeper time. The divergence of human lineages hundreds of thousands of years ago. The emergence of our genus Homo 2 million years before that. The evolution of primates, of mammals, of vertebrates, the long, slow development of complex life on Earth stretching back 3.5 billion years. All of that history is in you. Every successful adaptation, every innovation that allowed life to persist and flourish, every challenge overcome, every extinction survived. You are the product of 4 billion years of unbroken success. Every single one of your ancestors, from the first self-replicating molecules to your immediate parents, survived long enough to reproduce. The odds against your existence are so astronomical as to be effectively impossible. And yet, here you are, breathing, thinking, experiencing consciousness. You are a miracle, not in a supernatural sense, but in a purely natural one. You are the universe become aware of itself. Stardust that learned to contemplate stars. Now, with that awareness, ask yourself, what do I owe to the ancestors who made me possible? How do I honor their sacrifice, their struggle, their persistence? The answer, I think, is simple: by living fully, by embracing the complexity and contradiction of being human, by drawing on all aspects of your inheritance, the Neanderthal strength, the Denisovan adaptability, the modern human creativity, the hybrid synthesis that made all of it possible, by being curious, by remaining open, by refusing to simplify yourself or others, by recognizing that the boundaries we draw between self and other, between us and them, are always provisional, always permeable, by choosing synthesis over separation, mixing over purity, transformation over stagnation. This is what the hidden epoch teaches. This is the wisdom encoded in our genes, waiting to be remembered. You are not just yourself. You are the temporary manifestation of lineages stretching back through inconceivable spans of time. You are the current expression of an ongoing process that will continue long after your individual consciousness has dissolved back into the elements. And that's not depressing. It's liberating, because it means your value doesn't depend on your individual achievements or failures. You're valuable simply by being part of this ongoing story, by carrying forward the legacy of everyone who came before, by passing on what you've learned to those who come after. You don't have to be special. You don't have to achieve greatness. You just have to live, to experience, to pay attention, to honor the incredible gift of consciousness by using it fully, by being present to the world, by engaging with the profound mystery of existence. The hidden epoch reminds us that humanity is a work in progress. We're not a finished product. We're still becoming, still evolving, not just biologically but culturally, psychologically, spiritually. And you're part of that process. Your choices matter. Your way of being in the world ripples outward, influencing others, contributing to the collective human experiment. So don't hide. Don't diminish yourself. Don't pretend to be simpler than you are. Be fully human, which means being complex, contradictory, mysterious even to yourself. Drawing on all the lineages that contributed to your existence. Honoring the Neanderthal within you and the Denisovan and the modern human and all the ghost populations whose names we don't know. They gave everything so you could exist. The least you can do is exist fully, boldly, authentically, not by finding some pure, simple essence, but by embracing the rich, messy, complicated reality of being a hybrid creature, born from the mixing of multiple lineages during a brief, extraordinary period in evolutionary history. The hidden epoch is calling you, not back to the past, but forward into the future. It's asking you to embody its lessons, to be a bridge, a synthesis, a demonstration that mixing creates strength, that diversity generates innovation, that openness leads to flourishing. This is your inheritance. This is what 30,000 years of transformation left you. What will you do with it? Will you honor it, embody it, pass it forward? Or will you forget it, retreat into simplicity, pretend you're something less than the extraordinary hybrid creature you actually are? The choice is yours, as it's always been, as it was for your ancestors during the hidden epoch, facing their own transformations, making their own choices. They chose to become, to mix, to transform, and in doing so they created you. Now you must choose, not just once but every day, every moment, every breath. Will you become? Will you mix? Will you transform? The hidden epoch whispers, yes, always yes. Become everything you are, everything you've inherited, everything you might be. This is the path. This is the way. This is how we honor the ancestors and serve the future. By being fully, courageously, unapologetically human. In all our hybrid complexity, the hidden epoch is not hidden. It lives in you, right now, always. Remember it, embody it, become it. This is who you are. This is who you've always been. A child of the hidden epoch. A bridge between past and future. A synthesis of everything that came before. Walk proudly in that knowledge. Live boldly from that understanding. You are the miracle 30,000 years of transformation made possible. Never forget it. Never, ever forget it. And with that, we've reached the true end of our journey. Not an ending, really. A beginning. The beginning of you understanding who you really are. Sleep well, child of the hidden epoch. Tomorrow, wake ready to honor your legacy. The ancestors are watching. The future is waiting. And you, right now, are the perfect bridge between them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with ancient voices, speaking wisdom your conscious mind has forgotten but your genes remember. Good night.